I always tell people, as soon as you feel you have something to add, please step up and lead.
So let's get started. Welcome, Miss Wu, to a virtual installment of Pizza and Politics. Unfortunately, there is no pizza here today, but we just wanted to start off and ask, what pizza topping do you identify with the most?
Ooh, identify with or always order?
Either or.
I think, I don't know, maybe this is a risky choice, but I will go with pineapple. It's it just gives it a little extra something that makes it fun and sweet, and I think the pizza for the best kind of celebrations.
Love it. To start us off, we'd love to look at a project that you're kind of spearheading, which is called the Boston Youth Transportation Project, which focuses a lot on issues that teenagers have with like the transit system in Boston. And you've been a big part of the younger generation's fight against climate change. Like, why do you think interacting with younger constituents, even those who can't really vote yet, why do you think that's important? And do you think other politicians should do the same?
Every major advance in our country, from equity and civil rights and justice, has always been led by young people, and my philosophy is that um, it's central to how we should be thinking about policy and building community. So our Boston Youth Transportation Project was really led by Lily Coe, one of our fellows from a few years ago, who reached out to hundreds of high schoolers in Boston to talk about how they get around the city, and what the barriers or challenges were, and what their hopes for the future would be. And almost every single conversation cost came up, particularly the fact that at that time, Boston Public Schools had a system where if you lived a certain distance away from your school, they would give a free T pass, because they weren't providing bus transportation. But then if you lived, I think it was within a mile and a half, um, the sort of walk zone, as they called it, then you didn't have a T pass. And we realized in conversations directly with our most impacted residents, the young people, that the T passes were for much more than just getting to and from school. It was to get to jobs and internships and social activities, and um, any other family type appointments that they needed to make. And so it was kind of arbitrary of who had a way to get to their job or internship and who didn't, just based on how far they lived from their school. So we really pushed, and then by that next school year, the city changed that policy, so everybody got a free T pass. But I think it wouldn't have happened without really centering the lived experiences and the leadership of our students and youth leaders.
So going off that and the T or the MBTA, so fixing the T is one of your largest priorities. And would this type of change intersect with other issues that you're passionate about?
It's really I think the foundation for almost every issue that we talk about, whether it is access to great schools, and again, being able to get to one, or connect students with opportunities in other parts of the city. It's about access to healthcare. It's about closing the racial wealth gap, and which you look at which communities have reliable, affordable transit access versus not, which communities bear the burden of traffic and air pollution that comes from that traffic. Um, and if you think about climate, right, at the state level, transportation makes up the biggest part of our carbon footprint. At the city level, because everything's a little more dense, it's about buildings, but transportation is the second source of emissions. So either way, if we're serious about trying to close these gaps and reach our climate goals, we have to be investing in public transportation and taking down barriers for everyone to use it.
Yeah, going off that topic and like branching out to a new one, I just wanted to ask you, what would you say is the most rewarding part of public service, and vice versa? What would you say is the most challenging part?
I think for me, the most rewarding part is just seeing a way to change the dynamic that my family's lived through, that so many families are living through, where people know that we can do something, but that they're just barriers in the way, and often arbitrary barriers, whether it's around language or um, geographic access or structural racism. And so there's this, every day I get to spend my time thinking about how to plug people in and change the policies and change who gets to have a voice in those policies. The most challenging part, I think, sometimes it feels like there's so much to do. And at this moment, especially, we are, for example, with climate change, if we had started a couple decades ago when many folks first started saying that we should have, we could put in place policies that are much more incremental and feel less, quote unquote, drastic. But we're just in such a moment of crisis all at once, and the pandemic has certainly exposed that and exacerbated it. That there's a window right now that we have to do everything. And I think it also forces the recognition that all of our issues are interconnected. And so you can't fix one without thinking about the other, right? School quality and public safety and climate is all intertwined with poverty, and how we address, you can't fix anything in a vacuum. So we need holistic approaches that are driven by community leadership.
That's really interesting that you bring that up. So you talk about like a holistic approach, but how would you choose which issues like to prioritize, such as the wealth gap or the transportation system?
I think it's more about figuring out what are the immediate short-term steps that we need to take, and which communities should be leading the conversation in those areas. I mean, the reality is that we have to do all, right? You can't say that not being able to get around, lack of transit access is more or less important to someone than not being able to get a job, or the fact that the jobs available to them will only, don't have predictable work hours or benefits and fair wages. And so it's all interlinked. And so what we need to do, I think, is inject that urgency into every part of our decision making. And so that's why we've put forward so many specific plans on food justice and the Green New Deal for Boston, and closing the digital divide, and closing the gap for early education and care. Because the more we're doing that planning and visioning and organizing now, then it's just about implementing.
So, how has your position in public service impacted your outlook on how it is possible to enact change?
I really feel that at the city level, anything is possible, and there's no issue that we can't make progress on. I think what I've come to believe is that it's usually a matter of focus and um, sort of being proactive than anything else, because we often want to address an issue, but then there's another news story that comes out about some other issue, and then there's a rush to make an announcement that you're doing something on that, and then a different one and a different one. Whereas if we're just clear about the structural causes and the sort of root issues that are affecting all of this, right? Hunger and transportation and housing and schools, then if we just stay kind of laser focused on that, everything else flows from making sure our families are connected to opportunity and stability.
With the different demographics that you've been talking about, you offer a lot of volunteer grassroots opportunities that people of all ages can do to support your campaign. Where do you think grassroots movements need to overlap with the government and like legislative action in order to produce a meaningful change?
Yeah, in my 8 years on the council now, we've really seen the power of kind of the inside-outside coordination and dynamic. There is always going to be some level of tension. I hope it's healthy, I guess I should say, for activists and community on the outside to always be pushing for faster, more sort of bolder responses. And, in the actual implementation of issues, when you're on the government side, there will be, there are budget constraints. There are, just the practicality of what you tackle in what order. You can't do everything. You can't all of a sudden hire, triple or multiply by 10 the number of city workers that are on the budget to be able to do all these things. So I think what I believe the right relationship and role is that government should always be a platform for activism, not shutting out people from decision making and sort of guarding against or dealing with or checking the box on issues, but really inviting activists and community leaders in to have an honest conversation about what those trade-offs look like, and to work hand in hand with the decisions on how to prioritize things or what order. And of course, again, there will never be like any decision that everyone is happy with, and it is necessary that there will continue to be pressure to do more faster. But we could see a totally different relationship between government and community, especially at the city level. And in Boston, a city where we have so many resources outside government too, from community activism and anchor institutions, our universities, businesses and nonprofits. In some ways, it's really about coming to a shared vision of how everyone can plug in their own way too. So it's not that government's in control of everything and we can only go as fast as we have internal capacity to do it, but that we are putting forward a proactive vision for how we tackle these issues, and coordinating among all different sectors of how to do the most that we can, the fastest that we can.
That's really interesting. Transitioning more to like your climate change aspect of your platform, you released your Boston Green New Deal this past year, which is focused on bringing more climate action to Boston to further fight, global warming. What kind of inspired you to create this proposal and push it out this year? And how do you see yourself as mayor implementing it?
Well, we would have pushed it out earlier, but it takes a long time to, or at least from our perspective, to get the organizing and the listening and all the coordination right with community groups. And so we really got started basically as soon as the federal Green New Deal was announced. I was proud to be the lead sponsor in pushing for a resolution from the Boston City Council to get us officially on record in support of the Green New Deal that Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Markey had put forward. This was in spring of 2019. And then as soon as we did that, it's more just a formal statement than an action necessarily. So my team started thinking about what do we do at the city level that we can actually move forward and propose, so that we're coordinating and building momentum for action at the state and federal level. And we basically took the next year, shout out to Nina Schlegel, our lead author on that report, who spent 12 months talking to local activists, national groups, including some of the authors of the federal Green New Deal. We came up with a plan. And so then it was basically February, March of 2020, and then the pandemic hit. And so then we took another 6 months really analyzing how this moment of public health crisis and the economic crisis from the pandemic and a national reckoning on systemic racism, how that should really ground our Green New Deal so that it was rooted in this recovery. So then we finally were able to feel good with making this the right Green New Deal for this moment, and have been organizing around all of the issues that the city could take on since then.
I know you mentioned a lot about the Boston City Council and your experience on there, and I was just kind of wondering, how is your position differ from being a mayor, and what do you think you'd be able to accomplish as a mayor that you probably won't be able to accomplish with your time on the city council?
So Boston has a form of government where the city council is the check on any budgetary decisions, the council votes up and down on the mayor's budget and approves any appropriate financial appropriations from the city, grants or other expenditures. And the council can also write or introduce municipal laws, ordinances that the mayor signs off on. All of the implementation and all of the running of our agencies happens through the executive, mayoral side. And so the council's role, I think the council's power is to draw attention to issues, to force the dialogue, to really shine a spotlight on what is urgent, and to suggest the legislative changes that could make a difference. But implementation of all those programs really are in the hands of the administration. So I think as mayor, the role is to actually fit together all of these pieces and see through progress on all these issues, right? Not just changing the rules on the books with legislation, but making sure that all the functions of city government, the programs, the money that we're spending, the staff that we're hiring actually delivers that change on the ground.
Now, we briefly touched upon this topic before, but I just wanted to bring it back. Do you think Boston's response to the pandemic in terms of the city school system was adequate? And what would you do differently if you had more influence at the time?
It's been really just painful and frustrating to watch, of course, in my city council role, but even more so as a mom. My older son is in kindergarten. My younger son is in the BPS lottery, waiting to see where he'll be assigned for next school year. We're hoping it's at the same school. Who knows? And my kindergartner just started going back to school in person for 2 days a week a couple weeks ago. And so it had been basically a year of being at home, and it's been really tough. And the issue is not with our teachers or school staff who have been working so hard to keep kids feeling supported and nurtured, even with remote learning. But there were some long-standing challenges that were never addressed before, or had not been addressed fully before the pandemic, that made it so that we were in this situation. Our school buildings are old, right? Only 30 some of the 125 school buildings had modern ventilation systems. The rest of them, some of them, the windows didn't even open. We had to do major repairs just to get windows to be able to function, to have airflow in these classrooms. And many of the classrooms were crowded. And so the rule to have 6 feet of distance in between desks made it impossible for everyone to come back. And so, I understand how much there was to deal with and how unexpected it was. I do believe that we should have had a much more comprehensive, open, transparent conversation, inviting in ideas and solutions from our constituents, from school communities earlier on the process. The first time that we got a draft reopening plan was a month before school was supposed to start. And it wasn't enough time to go through all of that. What ended up being the biggest barrier was these buildings, and that we didn't have enough space in safe, healthy buildings with modern airflow. And if we had started talking about that a year before, right, at the beginning of the pandemic, when the scientists were already telling us it would likely be that there would be a major spike when school, at the sort of fall, when people had to go indoors and school year started, we should have started that conversation then, to reach out to other buildings that had unused space, right? All the universities that were shut down could have partnered with us to have classrooms there. We could have done a lot more outdoor space during the summer and the warmer months if we had started earlier. We could have thought about, public venues that were closed, even like TD Garden or neighborhood hockey rinks, where we could have really spaced apart and been creative about how to connect school communities to those healthier spaces. And none of that happened really, because it just was such a compressed timeline, and teachers and families were not invited into the conversation until basically too late to shape it.
So we kind of want to transition to more broad topic. So how has your somewhat extensive law background impacted the way that you view social change and the way that you view your priorities as well?
So I didn't grow up wanting to go to law school. I became interested when, in the midst of a very tough family situation for my family. My mom was struggling with a mental health crisis, and I left my first job out of college to be at home with my family to try to stabilize everything, and decided to open a small family business to keep the family going and something that I could do while still taking care of everyone. Um, and in that process of dealing with city government about all the rules and regulations and laws, it was incredibly frustrating. So I felt like I needed to come back to law school to learn that language that had been making it impossible for my family to get what we needed, for the community to have the space that we were trying to create. And I don't. People ask me sometimes, do you have to be a lawyer to be an elected official? Definitely not, right? There's no single path that makes anyone better or more qualified to be an elected representative. I think the most important thing is really feeling connected to the community that you're representing and passionate and driven to make a difference for that community. For me, having a background, having a legal degree in education was helpful in the sense that I grew up never having been exposed to anything related to politics. And I realized in going through what my family did with my mom and her mental illness that so many of these issues were structural, were baked into the rules and the laws that everybody had to navigate. And I wanted to be able to understand that and do something about it. But I think in a lot of ways, any pathway, any background makes for really great elected representation. Again, as long as you're connected to the community.
That was a really amazing answer, and I thought it really encompassed a lot that you've been talking about so far. But to close off, thank you so much. It's been incredible to hear your solutions and how interconnected everything is, and how you view a ton of these issues with such a holistic view and approach. And we really appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with us. One last question. Why do you think students should take the time out of their busy schedules to learn about government?
Yeah, it's I'm someone who didn't when I was a student. I never thought that I would run for office all through college, and really didn't get involved in anything political. I realized a few years later in my life just how much every single part of what makes your life livable or fun or sustainable or safe or healthy relies on decisions that are going to be made with or without your input, right? And for far too long, we have been seeing those decisions made without the input, particularly of Black and Brown communities, immigrant families, environmental justice communities, young people, and where that has led us is to this moment now, where so many of our laws, our economy, our government are hurtling towards a major crisis, right? We are basically putting the influence of large corporations at the expense of our planet and its livability and the chance for future generations to really thrive. So I keep saying if we just have younger generations take over everything, things will be a lot better, because we will see the type of urgency. Your generation has the greatest stake in what happens in the future, right? The longest time on this planet. And it's really the sort of the impacts of decisions that previous generations have made, for better or worse, and a lot of times for worse, are on your shoulders. And so I'm doing my part as a millennial as much as I can to try to clear the way, to make room for your leadership. And so I always tell people, as soon as you feel you have something to add, please step up and lead, right? And sometimes it doesn't feel comfortable. You might not feel like you're personally ready. You might feel like there's pressure to get, more degrees or more years or titles before you do something, but think not just from your own mind, right? I think especially as women and as women of color, there's a little bit of an extra sort of should I be doing this type of thought process. Think from the perspective of the community. What will your community miss out on if you're not at the table, making sure their voices are at the table as well? And so I'm so here for you all stepping up, and looking forward to partnering and following your lead on these issues.
Yeah, again, thank you so much. This has been such an incredibly just insightful conversation, and we really appreciate it. We also really look forward to staying in contact with you. And again, thank you so much for your time and what we talked about today. It should
Thank
be
you all
great.
so much. Have a good
Awesome.
rest of the weekend.